Howdy, hey, howdy, hey. Hello, hello, today. It's Wednesday, April 5th. How are you, everybody? Eric, good to see you. Thank you for my pretty banner, my custom banner. You guys, I'm not as prepared today as I was the other day, but I am prepared better than most days. So, how about that? We're prepared to go do this study together, and I'm going to get right into it. I have no ramblings this morning to speak of. I have nothing to say this morning. Can you believe it? Just nothing about nothing. I know. How are you, honey? Good to see you. So excited. I'm so excited. Let me share my screen and take you to the study. I realize I need to get better at dropping this website with the study. I haven't been very good at that. I started off doing that, I think. If you go to the Constitution study on Stand Up Humboldt News, if you go to the Constitution tab, you go to study. Down here is the guide. When I say questions, I should include the link for you so you know it's here. But this is where it's at. And many of my viewers already know this, but if you're new and you're following along, this is standuphumboldt.news, and there's a Constitution study, and this is this page here. We are on questions 14 through 23 from the Making of America book here. And let's see. I've got those pages uploaded as well. So, excuse me, we're not going to read them straight through. We're going to read these questions. Man, I forgot my water. No, I filled it up and I left it somewhere. But we're going to read the question. It always tells us what page the answers are on. It's a pretty easy study. So, like I said, we're going to get right into it. Look at that. 2 minutes and we're going. We're going. Number 14, what right is given to every American in the first sentence of Article 1 in the Constitution? Let's look at page 250, which is right here. Let's see. Oh, this one doesn't blow up. That's right. I am on my desktop. I blow you up analog-ish. Is that the way? There's analog and then there's digital, right? Isn't that the thing? All right. Question again, because I already forgot. What right is given to every American in the first sentence of Article 1 in the Constitution? Well, it's right there at the top. I feel like we've read this before. All legislative or law-making powers granted by this Constitution shall be vested exclusively in the Congress of the United States. This provision gives every American the right not to be subject to any federal law unless it has been reviewed and approved by a majority of the people's representation. As originally conceived, the American lawmaking procedure was just about as foolproof as the founders could make it. Their legacy to future generations included a series of highly significant guidelines for Congress. Because a number of these have been seriously eroded, it might be well to briefly review their suggestions. And I'm sure they're going to ask us about their suggestions. So, how many federal laws did the founders envision we would need? By whom did they want proposed legislation to be scrutinized, and why? Well, let's see. There's the word scrutinize right there. Federal laws should be few in number. Madison wrote, the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Jefferson followed this policy when he was president. On one occasion, he wrote, the path we have to pursue is so quiet that we have nothing scarcely to propose to Congress. A noiseless course, not meddling with the affairs of others, unattractive of notice, and mark that society is going on in happiness. Oh, how glory. That must have been. What a glorious time. Must have been amazing, huh? I'm going to read it from my book. You guys can follow along, but I don't want to be up in the screen like that. But it's there for you. So I have the book right here. What was the other question? A few in number and who was supposed to scrutinize them, right? Let's see. Who was supposed to scrutinize these things? I have a feeling it's us. Jefferson also said laws are made for men of ordinary understanding and therefore should be construed by the ordinary rules of common sense. This meaning is not to be sought in metaphysical sublets which make anything mean everything or nothing at pleasure. The House to scrutinize proposed laws as the representations of the people. The representatives are to be elected by the people at large. They will therefore be the guardians of the rights of the great body of the citizens. So well guarded is this Constitution throughout that it seems impossible that the rights either of the states or the other people should be destroyed. Charles Pinckney of South Carolina said the Senate will be elected by the state legislatures and represent the states in their political capacity, and thus each branch, the House and the Senate, will form a proper and independent check on the other, and the legislative power will be advantageously balanced. Unfortunately, this balance was lost with the passage of the 17th Amendment in 1913. The president also scrutinizes new laws from a national viewpoint, it says, but let's go back to our questions. Excuse me. 16. Well, I guess they're not going in. They're going to ask us about the methods the federal government used to gradually encroach upon. Let's finish up with the president. James Wilson of Pennsylvania said he will, under this Constitution, be placed in office as the president of the whole Union and will be chosen in such a manner that he may be justly styled man of the people. Being elected by the different parts of the United States, he will consider himself as not particularly interested for any one of them, but will watch over the whole with paternal care and affection. I consider it a very important advantage that such a man must have every law presented to him before it can become binding in the United States. And then lastly, the courts shall scrutinize the laws. If the validity of a law is challenged, then it is to be scrutinized by the federal courts to make certain that it conforms with the requirements of the Constitution. Hamilton summarized, the courts were designed to be an intermediate body between the people and the legislative in order, among other things, to keep the latter within the limits assigned to their authority. The interpretation of the laws is the proper and peculiar province of the courts. A constitution is, in fact, and must be regarded by the judges as fundamental law. It therefore belongs to them to ascertain its meaning as well as the meaning of any particular act proceeding from the legislative body. With so much good advice concerning the lawmaking process, it was no doubt expected that the proper procedure would remain strictly within its prescribed limits, particularly in view of the statement in Article 1, Section 1, that all lawmaking authority would be vested exclusively in Congress. However, that is not what happened. Describe the methods that the federal government has used to gradually encroach upon state sovereignty. Well, we can kind of know what happened there. The Constitution was designed to make states sovereign in their realm of responsibility and the federal government sovereign in its realm. The big question was whether or not they might encroach on each other. It is interesting that almost from the earliest years of the nation's existence as a republic, the three branches of the federal government strained at the chains of the Constitution in their endeavor to invade the territory of state jurisdictions. Sometimes this occurred throughout gradual usurpation, as the Congress passed laws which preempted state functions. At other times, it has been a question of the executive branch using a modest enabling act of Congress to absorb a massive amount of administrative authority over the states. Finally, there has been the tendency of the courts to favor this federal encroachment on the states by all three branches of government. Therefore, in spite of all the clear and precise declaration in Article 1, Section 1, that Congress shall have the exclusive power to make all federal laws and that those laws would pertain only to the powers enumerated in the Constitution, here is what happened. Message from modern Washington planners. If you don't, we will. Perhaps it was inevitable that Washington would develop a paternalistic attitude toward the states. No doubt that is why the structure of the Constitution was designed to keep them separated. Nevertheless, a little neat gimmick was conjured up by federal planners, which targeted these states with various programs and attached a message. If you don't, we will. Thus, if federal monitors perceived a problem among the states which was not being handled to their satisfaction, there was an open declaration that if the states did not take care of the matter, the federal government, even though it had no constitutional territory authority to do so, would feel compelled to take action. All kinds of federal money began to be appropriated with federal regulations to go with it, because these states were not complying with federal standards. Before long, the states could say to Washington what the Declaration of Independence had said to George III. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither a swarm of officers to harass our people and eat out of their substance. These programs included everything from safety belts and speed limits to land reform, environmental programs, reparation of state legislatures, reparationment, beautification, central city planning, safety and health regulations, physical facilities for education, hospitalization, daycare centers, nursing homes, local charities, unemployment, job training, and so forth. The singular part about all of this, the fact, is that these welfare programs and social goals were for the most part wholesome and desirable, but the founders had said a federal delivery system for these purposes would be wrong. In fact, it turned out to be the most expensive delivery system in the world, you think? It has been operating from the wrong level of government. Once in place, however, it became a gigantic task for anyone to return it to its proper level. Well, ain't that the truth? It's a monster. (17) Describe the stages through which the president's issuing of executive orders has passed since the founders' time, 252 to 254. Yeah. Temptation of the executive to write laws. The expansion of the executive branch into lawmaking business has developed gradually ever since the Interstate Commerce Commission was developed in 1887. Various governmental agencies have been issuing edicts known as administrative law, which are enforceable in the courts just as much as the laws of Congress. Congress has also passed broad enabling acts and delegated to the executive branch the power to issue executive orders, which are enforced as laws, even though they're never officially approved by Congress, but are simply published in the Federal Register. Today, more laws are imposed on the American people by these unconstitutional and irregular means than are passed by Congress. The idea of the president issuing executive orders as enforceable laws has gone through several stages. It talks about all the stages. Is that what it's asking us? Describe the stages. So we have the constitutional stage. It explains in the beginning, cabinet president or his cabinet officers issued executive orders to their departments. They were simply administrative orders and affected only their administratives, agencies, and the government. In other words, they did not affect the public as the laws of Congress do. Gradually, however, these executive orders began to increase in number and scope of influence. The Strong's President stage. The transition to this new stage is indicated by the number of executive orders issued by various presidents. Cleveland issued 71, McKinley 51, but Roosevelt 1,006. Oh, let me take you to the page. Sorry. We're on this page here. Roosevelt 1,006, and that's right here. Right there. From this point on, each president looked upon executive orders as a tool to demonstrate the power of the president to take independent action. Yeah, don't we know it? Then we go to World War I stage, where Wilson used war powers. For example, the Food and Administration, the Grain Corporation, the Trade Board, the Committee on Public Information, they were all set up by executive orders without being specifically or individually authorized by Congress. Illegal. On the basis of implied authority, the president used his broad war powers to range across the entire economic and industrial horizon of America. The strict interpretation of Article 1, Section 1 has never been the same since. 18. How have secret executive agreements been used by the presidents to make law? Secret. Ooh, I see it. Making secret executive agreements. It was never contemplated by the founders that the heads of nations would sit in a huddle and reach secret agreements other than temporary wartime strategies. To prevent the negotiation of secret agreements, the founders required that all treaties with foreign powers must be submitted to the Senate for approval. During World War II, the State Department began negotiating numerous secret arrangements as part of the Allied war strategy. And this established a precedent for the so-called executive agreements, which were accepted as commitments among the heads of states, but were never presented to the Senate for ratification as treaties. And there's an example of Yalta and Roosevelt and Churchill and Stalin there, how they all worked out a little deal. It was the Yalta Agreement. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. A statement was issued, but soon became apparent other commitments were made which were never presented to the Senate and were beyond the strategic agreements authorized by war powers. Under severe pressure, the State Department finally released the conference papers, but held back certain sensitive material. To this day, neither the Senate nor the American public is completely aware of all the commitments made to the Soviet Union at Yalta with Stalin. Lovely. 20. Identify the two great safety nets provided in the Constitution to protect the people from unconstitutional activities by either the Congress or the courts. 256 to 257. Two safety nets. It just couldn't be easier, you guys. Look, two safety nets right there. I mean, I love me an easy study. The founders provided two devices as safety nets to protect the people from such unconstitutional irregularities, either by Congress or the courts. The first safety net was to give the state legislators in Article 5 of the Constitution power to reverse decisions of either the Congress or the courts by calling for a convention to amend the Constitution. It was set up so that neither the Congress nor the courts could prevent it. And let's see, the second safety net was the common law jury, while existed in all its powers until 1895, when the Supreme Court robbed it of half its strength. The original American jury, exercising full common law authority, had the power to pass judgment on the law as well as find the facts. Under this arrangement, if the members of the jury felt a particular law was unjust or unconstitutional, they could bring in a verdict of not guilty, no matter what the Congress or the courts had said. The founders considered this to be the people's ultimate defensive weapon or last resort against abusive government. And then the Supreme Court Judge Theophilus Parsons said, the people themselves have it in their power effectually to resist usurpation without being driven to an appeal to arms. The people themselves have it in their power effectually to resist usurpation without being driven to an appeal to arms. An act of usurpation is not obligatory, it is not law, and any man may be justified in his resistance. Let him be considered as a criminal by the general government, yet only his fellow citizens can convict him. They are his jury, and if they pronounce him innocent, not all the powers of Congress can hurt him. And innocent, they certainly will pronounce him if the supposed law he resisted was an act of usurpation. #21. Explain how the House of Representatives and the Senate, as originally envisioned by the founders, helped to establish a perfect balance in government of the one, the few, and the many. 258 to 259. That's what the title says up here. The Congress shall consist of two separate legislative bodies, one to be called the Senate and the other to be called House of Representatives. What's the question again? Explain how the House of Representatives and the Senate, as originally envisioned, helped establish a perfect government, the one, the few, and the many. Okay, the one, the few, and the many. The one, the few, and the many. That's what I'm looking for here. And let me get you to the page. It's right here. The one, the few, and the many. There it is. Polybius, Locke, and Montesquieu advocated inventing a system which would combine all three groups. What groups? The House, the Congress, and the Senate. House of Representatives, Congress, and Senate. Okay. Inventing a system which would combine all three of these groups so that the advantage of the one could be exercised in administering the law and taking over in wartime. The few could participate as the guardians of propriety, wealth, and the established order of things, and the many could be represented in a House of Representatives so that the will and approval of the people as a whole would be considered before laws were passed or taxes assessed. What are the purposes of an upper chamber such as the U.S. Senate? Question number 22. What are the purposes and structural characteristics of a sound upper chamber such as the Senate? It says right here. Right there is the question. Right here is the answer from Hamilton. There are few positions more demonstrable than there should be in every republic. Some permanent body to correct the prejudices, check the intermittent passions, and regulate the fluctuations of a popular assembly. It is evident that a body instituted for these purposes must be so formed as to exclude as much as possible from its own character those infirmities and that mutual ability which is designed to remedy. It is therefore necessary that it should be a small, that it should hold its authority during a considerable period, and that it should have such an independence in the exercise of its powers as will divest it as much as possible of local prejudices. It should be so formed as to be the center of political knowledge, to pursue always a steady line of conduct, and to reduce every irregular propensity to system. Without this establishment, we may make experiments without end, but shall never have an efficient government. From these principles, it follows there ought to be two distinct bodies in our government, one which shall be immediately constituted by and peculiarly represent the people and possess all the popular features, another formed upon the principle and for the purpose before explained. Such considerations as these induce the convention who formed your state constitution to institute a Senate upon the present plan. The history of ancient and modern republics had taught them many of the evils which these republics suffered arose from the want of a certain balance and mutual control indispensable to a wise administration. They were convinced that popular assemblies were frequently misguided by ignorance, by sudden impulses, and the intrigues of ambitious men, and that some firm barrier against these operations was necessary. They therefore instituted your Senate, and the benefits we have experienced have fully justified their conceptions. Last question. What is the wisdom in having two branches in the legislature, and why was this innovation in Congress termed a miracle? I see the answer already. It's down here. Constitution, either miracle or genius. Mason, he believed the mind of the people of America well settled, first, in an attachment to Republican government. Secondly, in an attachment to more than one branch in the legislature. Their constitutions accord so generally in both these circumstances that they seem almost to have been preconcertated. This must either have been a miracle or have resulted from the genius of the people. Something that I was just thinking about during this study was the difference between a republic and a democracy. The best analogy I ever heard for it was 3 women and 1 man are on an island. In a democracy, majority rules. And if the men say they want to have their way with a woman, they will have their way. In a republic, her vote counts. 1 vote that says nay is enough. Do you understand how important it is that we know we are in a republic? Mob does not rule here. We need to know our laws and hold these people accountable. The grand jury is one remedy, and dealing with the courts is another remedy. And unless you're willing to be brave enough to stand before the courts and call them out, then we're just going to sit in this position, I suppose. But there are a lot of people who have put themselves at risk and who have blown some whistles and who have been out there fighting. And it would be so great if we could all just get behind them right now, because they really need us. They really need us to know we need to know our laws. We need to take the time to start educating ourselves with literature that is meaningful. So thank you guys for hanging out with me today for this study. I love y'all so much. It went better than I thought it was going to go. Not too bad. I'll see you guys Friday at 12:30. Peace out. Love y'all.